the financial institutions in Canada who are digital native and ready to have their data structured to be able to capitalize on these new AI tools are just going to be cleaning up.
I do want to say one thing on the living in tough times is there is still a lot of opportunity for people here. Most of our problems are solvable. Whereas, there are other countries I would say I would not want to have their challenges. And so, pair your patriotism with execution, because ultimately accountability leads to things downstream that are positive for us.
You're not thinking about getting into politics, are you, Eric?
Definitely thinking about it. Stay tuned, I guess.
I'm Nick Dyment, and this is The Electric Mindset.
You want to be the person in the room who asks the most questions.
There's no shortage of problems to tackle.
Where's the change part? Where's the people part you talked about?
This is going to be one of those moments of history that we're going to look back on.
Hey everybody, we're back to The Electric Mindset, where we're discussing how AI, technology, and business transformation are all coming together in this brave new world. I'm your host, Nick Dyment, Chief of Staff at Electric Mind. I got two absolute beauties on the pod today. This is going to be a great time. We're talking about the future of payments, which is something that impacts everyone. You probably don't think about it really. You just buy stuff and then go about your day. There's a whole world that goes on behind that. We're going to talk about that. I'm excited to learn. I don't know a lot about payments. So with me today, first and foremost, I've got Achtemichuk, AVP and Head of Payment Strategy at Central One. That's an awesome title.
Thank you very much.
And also, I haven't seen you in a while, and I'm very excited to get to talk to you here. This is going to be absolutely fantastic. Central One is the treasury, payments, and liquidity backbone for credit unions across Canada.
That's right.
Which is kind of a big deal. So excited to have you here.
Great to be here.
All
Great
right.
to see you, Nick.
Yeah, same, man. This is so fun. And with him, Eric Lombardi, who does so many things, transformation leader, a director here at work, running nonprofits, superstar. I don't know. I'm excited for you to tell your story on here. Eric, thanks for coming.
Yeah, thank you for having us.
I hadn't really heard of Central One until we were going to do this. So, how does it help the credit unions out?
So if we think about Central One's role in payments and specifically, there's a ton of very complex and large-scale transformation and investment that needs to be done for any FI. And in the case of Central One, what we can do is take on a lot of that complexity. So as an aggregator and a B2B provider of payments, we can be that payment services provider for financial institutions. So we run and operate all 5 core account-to-account payment types in Canada. We process transactions on behalf of our clients. We make it as easy as possible to integrate with our payments hub and payments technology through a headless API architecture. And then on top of the hosting and operations, we actually facilitate the clearing and settlement of those payments with the Bank of Canada. So for any individual FI, trying to do that on their own, unless they have the scale of the big 5, is very difficult, especially when you look ahead in terms of the payment space. It seems like each year, the minimum scale required to be a viable FI in this space is going up and up because of the pace of innovation and the pace of investment. So by aggregating here, we are allowing challenger FIs and smaller credit unions to have a viable alternative here.
And what I want to pick on there in particular is, C1 was originally set up to serve its members in this cooperative model. But if you actually look at some of the major customer acquisitions that C1 has been making, they've really emerged as one of the payment leaders in the Fintech space. And so, what they've done really interestingly is become one of the more competitive providers. And, I think Alex can speak to this, but it's about demonstrating value to their members in that they can go after some of the biggest names like Wealthsimple and still compete to win. And that's how their members know that they are investing in great payments technology and solutions. But
yeah, it's a great point. It gets complicated with Central One because we're cooperative. And so we are owned by our member clients, particularly our Class A credit unions in BC and Ontario. But at the same time, we want to ensure that we can provide as reliable and strong payments and treasury capabilities as possible. And a critical part of that is achieving scale.
Yeah.
And so if we were only to say we're going to stay and operate only in the credit union system, likely 5-10 years down the road, we're not going to have sufficient scale to keep up with the pace of innovation. So, a big focus for us has been this growth into new client segments. Can't name obviously all of that pipeline, but some important ones here recently with EQ Bank and Wealthsimple, some of the leading fintechs in our country, I think just prove the capability that we're building on. And this really allows us, again, to reinvest that additional scale back into our roadmap, back into better pricing for our member credit unions as well.
That sounds awesome. And if I'm hearing you correctly, you kind of do all the hard work. So if I wanted to start a credit union, I could just focus on, member experience, just focusing on the community. Because that's what I love about credit unions. I haven't worked with any directly, but I love that they're community oriented. Right?
Absolutely.
I had a roommate from Latvia. There's a Latvian focused credit union, right? They're different groups, and they can focus on the business and just making that, banking experience meaningful for their members, and all the magic of moving money around and stuff like that. Sounds like it's on you guys.
Exactly.
That's great.
It's not just the credit unions though, right? Like if you are a fintech and you have a business where you want to integrate payments, right? Like C1 is happy to be your partner, and they have an architecture that allows these smaller payment providers and use cases. And so, we see a lot of the major banks trying to enter the payments platform space, but C1 really is the entity with the experience in working with these, smaller companies, use cases, and financial entities. So their architecture has already been sort of crafted with sort of like the fintech experience in mind, because they're similarly smaller businesses typically when they're getting at the outset as well. And so I think that's like incredibly interesting opportunity space.
I agree. And for any FI, I would just ask them, what do you want to differentiate on? Is payments really going to be your point of differentiation when in many respects it's the commodity that needs to get right? You have to have it, has to be reliable. Yeah. Payments is successful when nobody knows about it. So if you can get it right, if you can do it as low cost as possible, and if in other areas like in fraud and banking host connectivity, again, those aren't going to be areas of differentiation. We can provide greater scale and capability to provide those services for you. You can then focus in areas of differentiation, whether it be your digital strategy, whether it be specific customer segment approaches like New to Canada for the Latvian credit union, or small businesses, whatever it may be.
That's kind of it sounds like the banking as a service type of a model, right?
In many ways, yeah.
So even extending that. So now I'm not a credit union. I've just got a cool app idea, right? That's like an Uber for something. And you can facilitate, sounds like, the money moving in the background.
Absolutely, we can. Yeah, we've done a significant investment over the last 18 months, really bringing a modern API connectivity platform for all of our core payment engines. And so this now allows our clients to integrate those payment rails into their own digital banking front end or any front end of their choice.
That's awesome.
I think like one of the questions that I'm having is, well, because you've talked about the importance of scale. So when you think about what's coming down the payments horizon, like whether it's real-time rail, ongoing payments modernization, like how do you guys feel about the positioning that you're in? And how are you sort of managing this continuous need to invest?
Well, as I alluded to previously, there's a significant investment within payments modernization in Canada. I think it's a common misconception that it's going to be a one and done program. I think it's a entirely different frame of thinking now for payments, whereas before, you go through a major investment, you establish the payment rail, maybe do some minor releases here and there for any kind of critical fixes, but by and large, you're just running it as efficiently as possible. In many ways, it's a paradigm shift now, which we're seeing the establishment of these new real-time rail, data-rich payment rails, starting with links and wires, and now going on to the RTR, Interact Instant, pretty soon for batch payments with future state of retail batch, again through Payments Canada. This level of investment will then also continue into the future. It's not going to be this one and done program, because if you look out to the horizon, things like stablecoin, embedded finance, crypto, a number of other innovations are just going to continue to come up. And it's going to be this paradigm shift where there's these ongoing major releases across each payment type. The end implication in all of this is a number of factors. For our clients, the minimum scale to be a viable FI in Canada is in many ways going up because of this required investment. Also, as a payments aggregator, we face the same issue. We're taking on this investment in large part for our clients' behalf. And in order to keep pace and support that required investment level, again, the required scale is going up. So all of this, Eric, is going back to that push and reframing for Central One, not just to be for the credit union system, but to support the challenger FI space in general to, again, bring that larger scale that can compete with the big five.
It sounds like there's a great value prop there because the system is getting more complex, right? There's a lot more options. Go back a couple hundred years ago, there's not too many payment options. Now you got all sorts of different models. You mentioned a whole bunch, right? And there's other parts of the world that are innovating a little quicker than we are here in Canada. Maybe we can talk about that in a second too. But if you're fronting the cost and the effort to do, again, the hard work, and then, because I'm a systems designer, you give me some APIs to plug into that do all the stuff and write a contract, that sounds like a win for me, so I can focus on my product that sits in front of it, my user experience, my differentiators.
Exactly.
Yeah. So maybe I'll come back to the point I was mentioning earlier. So, Canada catches some flack for our innovation pace. Mm-hmm. Some people think that's a good thing. Some people think that's a bad thing. So maybe where do you rate Canada on the global scale with innovation in this space?
I'm happy to start first.
Sure.
I do think we tend to underestimate the progress that Canada makes in payments and the fact that we do show global leadership quite consistently, or at least we have historically. So if I think about, the rollout of EMV, which is, chip and tap-based payments, we were quite a bit ahead of even the United States. And the United States actually was so slow on EMV that we almost entirely skipped that generation of products and moved almost directly into tap. Even on things like peer-to-peer services, Interac predated services like Zelle Payments United States, and many of these other peer-to-peer applications that became more popular there. I do think that to the extent that our regulatory systems have limited some of the competition in the peer-to-peer space, I think is worth acknowledging. But broadly speaking, business and individual adoption of some of the latest payment technologies has, I think, been quite strong. And I think even when we see some of the next generation payment rails, things like using a stablecoin backbone to doing foreign exchange, some of the leaders are actually based here in Canada. And I don't think people would even know that. I think about, the sale, I think of our mutual friends at Rail.io to Ripple, who are building out exactly that kind of platform, right?
Yeah. Got to get them on the podcast.
No, I know. Yeah, we're going to get Bonu in here. Don't worry.
Yeah, I know. Alex, like what do you think? And especially from C1's point of view, like how are you guys trying to stay ahead of the curve on some of the next waves of innovation in this space?
I think it's a really good question. I'd say on the one hand, there's a benefit to the fast follower approach. There's a ton of learnings that you can take from jurisdictions, geographies that you rush ahead with these adoption of new technologies, like in open banking, like potentially with stablecoin in the US, that we can then use and learn from. I would agree with Eric that I do think we've gotten some probably unfair criticism in the past as a nation in terms of where we're at in our historical record. And I think when RTR goes live, currently slated for Q2 2027, we'll see what that ends up shaking out to be, but it should be in somewhere in that ballpark. We'll be right at the table with the leading geographies worldwide for real-time payments. And fundamentally, that's a big reason why I love working in payments. I love this country. I've, been reading the headlines, going deep into the news around some of the concerns on productivity and how we can address this. And I think getting this right, getting our real-time payment solution right is absolutely critical for addressing those shortages. we think about cash flow issues, if we think about making sure we can be at the table with leading nations in the G7 and other industrializing countries to participate in the top tier of global commerce, it's critical we get these capabilities right. So long answer short, I think probably unfair criticism, but we need to get the next stages spot on and making sure we can move forward with an open banking framework in this country is another key area we need to get right.
You guys are making me so proud to be Canadian. This is awesome. What a great history lesson. Because I am probably one of the unfair criticizers, mostly because I'm interested in open banking, and I think we're a bit sleeping on that one. But I didn't realize all the innovation that's been going on. So this has been an awesome history lesson for me.
Well, even on issues like digital ID, right? These are things that could be transformative to how we even interact with non-banking systems, but it would come from sort of this sector. And if you look at countries like what Brazil has done, they have leveraged their digital ID to create an entirely new real-time payments infrastructure. And so, I do think that we do need to learn from some of the innovations that we're seeing in other countries. But I also would say, even within Canada's banking sector, I don't think we have a lot of challenges on keeping up on the pace of technology and innovation. I think where a lot of the issues come from is on the competition side. So do we have enough banks that are keen enough to use these utility services like payments to be creating new, interesting, or competitive financial products that do offer the differentiation that we might see in some of the other markets? But when we look at the plumbing, the plumbing is more or less pristine. And maybe I'm being overly patriotic in saying that. There's always issues, but I do think we have a great payment story to tell in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
With all this AI advancement, LLMs, the rate of change increasing in technology, how is that going to impact payments, in your opinion? Go first, Alex. I'm coming to you in a minute.
Mm-hmm. I think what it's going to do is make some of the underlying capabilities much better. So when we look at things like fraud, I think we're going to see quite a bit of innovation there. I think it's less about what change will happen in payments, but more because the velocity in which you can develop new solutions, applications, and technology exists. I think that we might actually see a trend towards leveling of the playing field. Alex was touching on this issue of scale. And even while the scale for the infrastructure and utility providers is going to become more important competitively, the ability for smaller players to differentiate themselves faster, I think, is also going to come as a consequence of AI. And so when you look at the structure of banking today, it's going to be a lot more challenging for a big bank to do the change management in adopting new technology tools like AI, both operationally but also in product. Whereas we're sort of entering an era where a much smaller competitor can offer even superior experiences and do that change management faster because they're more nimble. And so when I look at what the impact of AI could be in both Canadian banking and Canadian payments, I think there is a huge opportunity for us to address this sort of competitiveness issue that we have in this space.
Yeah, completely agree. I think that the scale and the reduction of barriers is a huge element. I think because of this, it's another paradigm shift that we're facing. The financial institutions in Canada who are digital native and ready to have their data structured to be able to capitalize on these new AI tools are just going to be cleaning up. If there's going to be a significant event horizon here where these FIs that are well placed are going to be able to scale and grow and also become a lot more efficient at a much faster rate than we've seen in recent years, certainly. From a Central One perspective, we're looking at this closely in terms of opportunities for us. There's a lot of areas that are ripe for integrating AI into our workflows. Fraud, one of them. AML is another one that we're actively investing in, where greater machine learning and beyond that, actually moving towards AI and taking AML decisions and flagging that and taking that next step further will be critical. Straight through processing, it's the name in the game in payments, really, to make sure as we're increasing in scale, as few as possible of those payments transactions is getting caught up and requiring any kind of manual intervention. So more and more will we have AI agents that can do more than just kind of an automation of activities, but truly make proper business decisions based off the risk profile, based off the value, multiple different factors. That's going to be critical. And, it's very difficult to predict the world of AI. I think in many ways, we're going to be in a dot-com type bubble where a lot of the expected benefits don't materialize, and these crazy valuations that we're seeing in some AI components of the economy won't come to fruition. But on the same time, just like with the internet, there were a million other use cases and benefits that we didn't foresee, which will come to the forefront. So I'm looking forward to that. My take, and this is one, again, you never know how close to right you're going to be, but a world in the near future in which you have agentic AI conducting payments on behalf of individuals and also businesses, and doing so in a conversational format through contextual payments. So having sufficient logic to understand, based off the request, what is going to be the fastest and most cost-effective payment rail to leverage, whether that be RTR or a legacy payment type, and all of that happening on behalf of the end user.
I want to add one more thing that I think could be interesting.
Yeah, do it.
Is we haven't really seen the AI interfaces offer almost a new type of application experience to their users. I don't think we've quite seen that enter into like banking and payments quite yet, but I do think that we will begin to see it. And I think that's where many of these, I call them products today, are going to become more important as like a utility function, as inputs into new like AI-driven product experiences, right? So like, hey, if I log into my banking app, there's a million different options that I have to navigate to. Sometimes they're hard to find.
Yeah.
But instead it might just be like, hey, like I'm trying to pay a tax bill for this, into sort of an agentic experience. And it'll know, hey, like I need to go use this rail. I need to get this type of transaction ID, and give the user the simplicity that sometimes the banking experiences don't necessarily give to us intuitively. Mm-hmm. And so the room for innovation in bringing people directly to what they're trying to do, I think is a really good opportunity.
You guys made a lot of really great points there. And now you're on tape with your prediction, Alex. So we'll see how it all kind of pans out. But the point about AI being able to even the playing field is a really good one. And I know that, my phone's been ringing a lot with C-suite folks asking, how should I reshape my delivery teams? What is the structure going to be to maximize the returns that AI can provide? And I think that for a new company that's starting today that doesn't have, baggage, maybe it can build itself around an AI-centric way of working and a tool set. I think you could probably deliver some pretty excellent market impact in 6 months or less.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
and I think like the biggest change isn't necessarily going to be like teams are humanistic creations, right? Like they're not going to be designed to work specifically on AI. What AI is going to do, like any productivity tool, is make us much more productive. And so what a smaller team is capable of achieving in terms of its output, I think that's where the really interesting question is, because every time we've encountered a new disruptive technology, and there's lots of fear around AI and jobs, and I get it. I don't know if I actually personally buy into that thesis. I would almost bet that AI creates more jobs than it eliminates in the end. Is the velocity that people can achieve when it comes to adopting these tools. And that should figure the question of, for our clients and for ourselves, like, well, now that we can do more, what more do we want to do? And I think that's a wonderful universe to live in.
Yeah, I'm still waiting for the end of work. Like, oh, guy, we did it all. We're done work. AI can do it. We're just chilling. I'm going to go to the West Coast and going snowboarding with you.
98% of humans once worked in agriculture. We find new and interesting things to do.
Yeah, no, I'm 100% with you. Maybe zooming way out, because you moved to the West Coast, and what's the fintech scene like out there? I'm in Toronto, so I don't know. I just assume everyone's snowboarding and hanging out and drinking coffee, and it's just a whole vibe. But I'm curious, how it is.
Fintech scene, there is it's not as strong as it should be. I'll put it this way. I think a lot of the focus has been more so on the FI space. There's some, minor and small scale digital banking type investments, less so in the payment space. And I think this could go down another rabbit hole for the podcast. For me, it's very interlinked with the cost of living crisis in Vancouver. I think the challenges of affordability, rent, salaries versus those dimensions makes it very difficult for a fintech to be able to take that risk in that environment. So even as an example, with just across the border into Alberta, staying in Canada in this case, with Neobank and the investment they're doing in Calgary, I think far easier to have that kind of investment level there than it has in Vancouver.
That's a good point. I know the time I've spent out there, people aren't making as much as Toronto, but they're spending more on rent. So how do you take a big swing if you got to put food on the table? No, you can't take the people out of this equation. Like, we talk a lot about AI and technology, but it's people doing the work, and they need to feel they're in an environment to succeed and have those creative ideas.
Yeah. If you look at the statistics, we see the lowest amount of new business formation in our country's history per capita right now. And if you look at, what are the demographics most likely to go independent and start a business? It is people under 40 most typically starting their first venture. And when you look at the cost of living challenges, people's biggest risk that they're taking now is in buying a home or even being able to afford rent. And when that becomes your biggest financial risk, well, then you're not taking your biggest financial risk on starting a business or going independent, because you don't necessarily have the stability or to kind of put your foot on the back and take that bigger risk. And so when it comes to, I think, even just the challenges around, well, not just if you're a great fintech, you should go work with Central One, which you definitely should, but how do we get more fintechs, et cetera? You want more new small businesses, and therefore you want more young people starting businesses. And therefore you need to figure out what the obstacles and barriers are for people to be willing to take bigger risks. And that's why all these issues, to me, particularly on affordability and opportunity, are an important sort of background discussion to be having within the financial industry. And I think, one of the things that I think C1 and even its credit union system should really be thinking about as, they move forward in the future is some of the lending and other financial products that could facilitate or support small businesses growing into, the medium-sized businesses and having that local partnership. I think they can really offer that in a way that some of the big, 5 or 6 might have a little bit less interest in, because of just how much of their mortgage business is such a cash cow, right?
Yeah. It's I don't know, we need more people starting companies and taking shots and using this stuff. And we're living in tough times. So,
But I do want to say one thing on the living in tough times is I think it's always important to remember that, there are reasons to be grateful to be in this country. And I think any Canadian who's traveled to other countries, there are some places that do things either differently or interesting ways. But there is still a lot of opportunity for people here. Most of our problems are solvable. Whereas, there are other countries I would say I would not want to have their challenges. And so, my message on this front would be, pair your patriotism with execution, because ultimately accountability leads to things downstream. that are positive for us.
You're not thinking about getting into politics, are you, Eric?
Definitely thinking about it. Stay tuned, I guess.
Yeah, we could workshop some policy here maybe on a future episode. But I want to come back to your personal journey, Alex. So you're talking about the company, like for you to grow in your career, right? Talking about young people today. So you were once a young person. Now you're still young, just slightly less young. What was one thing that really kind of cracked open this opportunity for you?
It's a great question. What I think I've done well, I think in large part came from my experience in consulting, and it's quite tough to get right, but translatable skills in that I've gotten quite proficient at when you've got a big complex problem, how do you break it down into the smaller bite-sized chunks and try to understand what is the actual crux of the issue here that we need to solve for, instead of getting distracted by some of the noise around a problem. What's really going to actually drive towards a sustainable competitive advantage and viable strategy for a line of business or company. So I think in terms of working through the weeds and being able to get to that essence has been a key part of where I've been successful. The other piece, and I'd encourage this for anyone staying or starting in their career, is curiosity. I think that comes, from one of the earlier questions I have. I've just always been a curious person. I've never wanted to be an absolute specialist. I'm more of a generalist. I like digging into new things and new problems. And, when you're just starting out, let's say on a early stages consulting gig, you may be doing some of the status reporting for the project that you're working on with a partner. Well, if you're looking at each of those status lines or updates or the upcoming milestones, dig into, okay, well, what actually does this mean? Why are we doing it in this order? What's coming next? Why couldn't we do this instead? Sure, it can be a bit annoying, but I think it really advances you in your career to understand the why behind so many things as you're digging into it. And I think as I've now come into Central One, I've worn a number of different hats, and I've only been with our payments line of business since April of this year. I certainly wouldn't consider myself a subject matter expert in payments by any stretch, but where I think I've been effective is pulling in our experts, teasing out their ideas and putting them on the page, trying to test them and understand, okay, how are these actually all going to fit together? Do we really actually need to do this, or is someone else, like a partner, better served for us? And again, where I would always go back to with strategy, is this going to lead to a sustainable competitive advantage, and why? So I think a lot of those ways of thinking that I've developed early on in my career have served me well. That did come with a pretty rapid rise in my career, which also came with a number of challenges. Imposter syndrome being front and center. And I think a big part for me of imposter syndrome was leading to burnout, in terms of I would consider and look around the table in terms of who my peers were at a given level, and see people, a number of years older than me, and think, well, the only way I can prove my value to be a sufficient level to their experience is by hard work. And so I'm going to work my ass off, and I'm going to show everyone at this table that I deserve to be here.
Yeah, grind set.
Yeah. But naturally, there's limits to how long you can keep that up. And I definitely had to face that front and center when it got to a point where this wasn't sustainable. And it was a bit of a reckoning as well of the people around me who have put me in that situation haven't put me there just because of my hard work. They've put me there for my ideas and the value I can bring outside of that. And I need to recognize that in myself. That led to a whole other kind of realization for me, in that I put so much stock into what people thought of me at work. So much of my internal intrinsic value came from how I was perceived in an office space by a client, whoever it may be. And naturally, as you go through a quick rise in your career, you come across and you encounter failure. And so the first couple times that I encountered failure, and I would put so much of my self-worth against it, it would just floor me, because that was rocking me to my core, challenging who I am if I wasn't good at work. But again, coming back to having that intrinsic belief in yourself and the value you can bring, I think it would be critical and a well-learned lesson for any of the younger listeners out there.
That really resonates with me a lot, and I definitely guilty of, I'd say, outsourcing my self-worth to others, and so that's an important lesson, right? And that maturity that you learn and that you've gained, and the wisdom. You're very wise, Alex. Very wise.
The West Coast has been good to me.
Yeah, it's something in that salty air, maybe. I don't know.
That's right.
So I'll ask you, I think, a similar question, Eric, because you're just this very impressive guy. Every time I talk to you, you're up to something new. And like, I know that's hard work, but you're also super smart, but it's probably more than that. So what's your secret?
I wish I could say I had a secret. I think I'm, similar to Alex, I think curiosity was a very big component. I also educated as an engineer, so I always want to know, like, why does something work? Mm-hmm. And I also like to always take like a systems view. Like, how have these processes led to like this outcome, and that outcome not being ideal or something that you want to fix? Well, now I want to understand what are the various factors that I can break down as variables into that system, and then which ones are influenceable, which ones are not, and therefore which ones should my priority be. I think when it comes to some of the things that I do outside of work, I think it's more of the fact that I feel like you look at systems that affect your life, and I walk around and I see like, well, why did that outcome happen? I want to understand it, and I think in learning so many more things about the different systems that affect our lives, particularly around governance. And learning, especially through some of my advocacy work, that sometimes the issues that you see, like they are a problem, but they might not be a priority for someone. And so how do you articulate or convince people that this is a priority and they do need to solve it? And learning through that process has actually really made me much more grateful to the democracy that we do live in. I think actually people would think it's harder than it is to change these kind of outcomes. And then in my career itself, I still feel like I'm learning who I want to be when I grow up and exactly what I want to do. And so my attitude towards my career has always been like, if I take the learning from what I'm doing, it doesn't necessarily matter whether or not I like the specific project or the specific piece of work I'm doing on, but how do I allow that to sort of build my, I guess, almost wisdom as a career, in my career, and as a leader when I need to. And I think that the root of that is, once again, curiosity. And I get imposter syndrome like all the time too. And I also just think that that's like a natural outcome of being conscientious. And so I think when I tell young people, like, how do you deal with something like that? The answer is you don't. You acknowledge, right? You acknowledge that it exists. Mm-hmm. It's probably a healthy thing for you to be questioning yourself, and it keeps you honest and humble in how you're executing your work as well. Mm-hmm. So I think, things like imposter syndrome or whatever, they're a challenge, but they're a healthy emotion to feel if we grapple with it correctly.
Yeah, as long as you can let it go. Mm-hmm. That's the secret. Well, we can have, guys, there's so many other podcasts we can have. This is amazing. Politics, mental health, affordability crisis. So I could talk to you guys forever. Yeah, any other things you want to bring up here? We can move to the lightning round, which is my gimmick.
Let's do lightning round. Let's do it.
Oh, man, I'm so excited. All right, so let me pull up my cheat sheet. Biggest misconception about payments modernization in Canada. Alex.
That it's a one-time event.
Great. One trend in fintech or AI that's overhyped and one that's underhyped. It's a twofer.
I think crypto in general is overhyped. I think that there are interesting use cases for blockchain, but I still personally think what we've seen today, far overhyped.
Okay. What about underhyped and succincter?
Payments in general is underhyped.
Okay. We'll take it. We'll take it.
Can I be controversial on that?
We like controversy.
So I agree with the overhyped on crypto, but I think underhyped stablecoin. And I'd love to just make sure that that's clearly differentiated in people's heads in terms of the use cases.
Noted. All right. One thing you're most excited about over the next 5 years of payments, Mr. Alex.
I think that my bold prediction on contextual payments conducted with agentic AI bots on behalf of users and businesses.
Bang.
That future.
Eric, you want in on that?
I mean, I think the advent of real-time payments is going to be big. I also think that global exchange has a lot, I mean, specifically with stablecoins. I think we're going to be seeing a lot of interesting stuff there.
Okay. And this one's for Alex. If people have been listening, they're vibing, they want to learn more about Central One, how can they do that?
Reach out to me on LinkedIn. Well, easiest place to learn all about Central One would be centralone.com. But broadly speaking, feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn. Happy to have conversations. And like I said, I'm not the payments SME. I'm not the payments expert in the team. I'm supported and work with a fabulous team of experts, and I'm happy to connect various folks who could be curious to have conversations either on a specific topic, some of our products, or who are interested in becoming a client of ours. I can connect you as is.
All right, Eric, if people have been loving what you're saying or not, how can they let you know? How can people get in touch with you, man?
LinkedIn, if it's professional, and if you're interested in thoughts, ideas, society, you can follow me on X.
Yo, what's your at?
At Eric D. Lombardi.
Guys, what a treat.
That was great.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks for having us. Yeah.
Thanks so much for tuning in to Electric Mindset. If you like what we're on about here, come and check us out, electricmind.com. As always, I'm Nick Dyment. Stay curious, stay bold, the future's bright.